Complying with tax legislation and cooperating with tax authorities is in Russia, like in most other countries, quite a difficult issue. Although in Russia the tax legislation has quite significantly improved during the last 10 years, it is still an area of law that develops most and changes very rapidly. In their recommendation, tax consultants must not only consider the latest changes in tax legislation, but also should take into account commercial and practical issues. For 12 years, Schneider Group has been consulting international and Russian companies in taxation. Schneider Group has tax experts with an excellent understanding of taxation as well as the needs of our clients. In Russia, there's a unified code for all kinds of taxes. This code is called the tax code, and it is a reference not only for tax experts but also for accountants. The main taxes for Russian enterprises are profit tax with a profit tax rate of 20%, VAT with a general VAT rate of 18%, and property tax. Property tax is mainly for taxation of real estate. Besides these, there are mandatory contributions to the social insurance funds. The social security contribution amount to between 30% and 50.1% and shall be paid by the employers. The personal income tax system is quite simple. There exists a flat rate for most kinds of personal income tax, especially labor income, of 13% for tax residents. Only for non-residents the tax rate amounts to 30%, and for special kinds of income, for example lottery prizes, the tax rates amounts to 35%. When entering the Russian market, most foreign companies ask for the appropriate legal structure and the tax consequences and financial aspects. If a company has already established a presence in Russia, the most common question appear when challenging, for example, decision of the tax authorities. A quite hot topic in taxation in Russia is the regulation of transfer pricing. The transfer pricing regulations are to a large extent in line with international practice, but to prepare the required documentation takes quite a lot of time and efforts. While registering a company in Russia, one must consider very carefully all the consequences from a legal, tax and financial point of view. For example, it should be taken into account that registering a company only takes a few months, but liquidating and closing down a legal entity might be much more costly and take much more time. The majority of subsidiaries in Russia are registered as limited liability companies. These companies shall pay all the taxes mentioned before. Furthermore, it should be taken into account that investments into such companies are only possible with a certain legal ground. But this also should be taken into account in the opposite direction. This means that any payments from Russia to abroad also is only possible with the respective legal ground. Financing of a subsidiary can be done in the following ways. One option is to make a contribution into the charter capital, but besides that there are also other options. For example, payment into the equity of the company, granting a loan to the subsidiary, or also payment for services rendered by the subsidiary to the parent company. Each kind of financing has its advantages and disadvantages. Here we will not go into details, but upon request we will be glad to provide you with a detailed statement about options for financing your subsidiary. Return of investments is as a rule done via dividend payments. Here you should take into account that when doing a dividend payment, withholding tax shall be paid. The tax rate of the withholding tax very much depends on the applicable double taxation treaty and can be between 5% and 15%. Another aspect is the accounting of services rendered by the parent company to its subsidiary. For example, services like IT services, granting of licenses, or management support services. Such services must be very carefully be justified and supported by documentation. While making settlements between the parent company and the Russian subsidiary, Russian currency control has to be taken into account. For example, a passport of currency control has to be opened when making settlements in the amount of more than 50,000 US dollars. From a legal point of view, representative of branches are just subdivision of the same legal entity. This means that capital flow is much easier, as it is just capital flow within one and the same legal entity. So justification documents like for transactions between subsidiary and a parent company are not necessary. Also issues with regard to loans, service payments, royalties, etc. do not exist, as they don't exist within one and the same legal entity. Payments can just be made without any justification documents. But with regard to branches and commercial active representative office, it should be taken into account that there might be an issue with profit tax. So under certain circumstances, it might be required that for one and the same business transaction, profit tax shall be paid in Russia, but also the tax authorities abroad might require payment of profit tax for the respective business activity performed in Russia. Operations between the branch or the representative office and other legal entities abroad are not subject to currency control, as mentioned before. But it should be taken into account that if a branch enters into commercial transaction with a Russian legal entity, a Russian client, such transactions are subject to currency control. So-called representative offices with commercial activities do not differ from branches with regard to taxation. Although in general, representative office shall not carry out commercial activities and are limited to marketing activities or auxiliary activities. In general, such a special type exists, and commercial activities are also possible for representative offices.